Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you for the opportunity to be here to address you all. Probably a little sleep deprived, so good luck with some of the questions which might come my way afterwards. But and can I also particularly thank you all for being here and not being at Martin Ferguson, although I suspect, given what he might be saying, it'll be a little bit more explosive politically. I guess on reflecting where the state is at, I think it's important to acknowledge that there has been a lot of reform work undertaken. There's a lot more to do, let me tell you. But I guess one of the greatest fears I have in terms of the outcome on Saturday, should it be the wrong outcome, is that economic reform in this state will be dead at a minimum for a decade, and its flow-on effect nationally will also be quite profound. I'm very mindful that if you closely examine the politics around this election campaign, that the very nature of the campaign that has been waged will potentially reflect on, should our opponents be successful, the very nature of the government that they will provide. The reform process around poles and wires is incredibly significant. Tackling one of the greatest economic lags on this state in terms of congestion is critically important. Do I think that the voting community is linking the lease to the need to tackle congestion? I think more work will need to happen in the next 72 hours to impress upon the community that link. And of course, the Labor Party have done through their marketing and their advertising, courtesy of their friends in the union movement, an incredible job to very much ensure that link hasn't been made. Also importantly, out of this reform process is energy reform. We need that private sector discipline to drive greater efficiencies across these operations and in ensuring ultimately more productive outcomes in terms of our businesses and industries right across the state. I guess if I'm to reflect also beyond poles and wires, well, what does a second-term government, Baird government, mean for the people of New South Wales? And within my office, we quite often share a phrase, well, how do you get the elephant to tap dance? There will be a greater focus in terms of strategic commissioning in the second term, of course being a fancy word for saying contestability. I'm very conscious that we have to deplore even the approach. We have to implore even more so the direction that we're taking around contestability, that it isn't always seen through the prism of saving money, but it's also in terms of driving greater productivity of our workforce by innovating, by exciting, by ensuring that our public sector workforce is more responsive, but also challenged. And I think that's something which we've started the process on, certainly in terms of what we've been doing, but I do want to see a greater emphasis on it, particularly in the years ahead. Greatest example I can point to is obviously for the Roads Minister in the area of roads maintenance, for instance, where that test around contestability has been applied. Yes, it might have heralded savings of $100 million, but for the workforce, that greater contestability has improved productivity and also, of course, ensured that those who are in those workplaces are enjoying a far more fulfilling experience when it comes to achieving outcomes for the state. Strategic commissioning, of course, takes many forms. Asset recycling, franchising, deregulation, contestability. we want to be more responsive to community needs, and we want to ensure that the community fits in with those needs. I'm glad Greg touched on my involvement in terms of disability services, because I think if you were to look at one of the greatest achievements of the government in New South Wales to date, it has centred around the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Not because it's about an increased funding source for the provision of services, but if you actually step back and look at what that reform is ultimately about, it's about the individual's fundamental human right in terms of ultimately having choice and control over the services and the supports that they want in order to achieve their life ambitions, rather than, as we've seen previously, the block funding of government to disability services and telling people, well, this is the service you ought to take. You're here to take it or leave it, and we'll see you later. We want people to flourish in this state. We want to get government out of the way in this regard. And the great innovation around the NDIS is that it hasn't been a simple transfer of disability services from the state to the Commonwealth. We've been innovative enough to ensure that both the Commonwealth and the state doesn't have any responsibility for direct service provision. Ultimately, what we're seeing as a result is an independent, standalone statutory authority in the NDIA, which is there to assist people with their planning and their individualised funding, and then allowing people to get on with their lives. I think what's possibly one of the key points again in terms of this election is that providing that form of custom designed solution for those who are most vulnerable in our community to the union movement equals privatisation. And I have to say that it has been, covered uncritically to date. If you consider that what we're seeing in terms of the Labor Party and the union movement saying, well, by devolving services which have traditionally been provided through the state, ultimately in putting the decision making in the hands of the individual and getting the state directed services out of the way, that's seen as some form of privatisation. It clearly isn't. The campaign to date, I think, has been based, unfortunately, on some pretty significant and dishonest lies. And I think one of the greatest that we've seen relates to poles and wires and the fact that prices will increase if the assets are leased. The union movement and our opponents have spent millions repeating this lie. And when you see expert after expert coming out to say it's not true, what has been Luke Foley's response? Well, I don't listen to an elite opinion. I listen to the people who I've been in essence lying to for the past 6 months. I am also, of course, very wary, certainly in terms of what we're seeing in the past 24 hours. An attempt by the union movement, who for many weeks has sought to denigrate our largest trading partner in China, and it's now very much come to the surface 48 hours before the media blackout in terms of the form of television advertising, an attack on, I guess, the Treasurer of the State for meeting with our largest trading partner late last year. There's nothing secret about it because it was fully disclosed as a result of the changes Mike Baird made in terms of ministerial diaries, and it was reported on back in January. I do not want to see this type of xenophobic campaign. I don't want to see the dog whistles at a time when the confidence in what we're doing as a state is incredibly strong. Incredibly strong. The market soundings around the transaction have been incredibly heartening, and I think it just goes to show that people have confidence in the direction that we're taking as a state government. But we do not want to see that confidence dented as a result of, I think, some of the worst kind of politics that you could possibly imagine. And for me also, I think the hypocrisy hasn't been lost on the actions of the Electrical Trades Union throughout this campaign. They're telling everybody that privatised assets are incredibly bad. You know, you'll see, enormous profits go to the private sector, despite these assets being highly regulated. And yet it's the Electrical Trades Union, through the Energy Industry Super Scheme, of which the head of the ETU is the Deputy Chair, investing in the privatised assets in South Australia and Victoria. That, to me, sums up their campaign and says it all. I think the other point that I would make is that we will see, I believe, an enormous transformation of state government in the next few years. The advent of smartphone technology should absolutely transform the way in which government at national and at state level provides its services to its customers. We've been incredibly successful as a government moving to one-stop shops, where you can now embark on 850 transactions through Service New South Wales. We want to see it expand. It should be a strategy that is a technology strategy, not just about providing more outlets, more shop fronts, but ultimately designed in a way to ensure that we get more people utilising the access to government, their access to government, through smartphone technology. And this will be one of the great transformations we will see in terms of state government, particularly in the next 5 years. At the moment, we're trying to transform the thinking within government to move away from the building of in-house IT solutions within government agencies to taking the brave step in the brave new world to engaging the private sector to innovate. We have an open data policy where we've actually put out to the sector data to facilitate the innovations, particularly around smartphone applications. If you consider, particularly in transport, where they put a whole series of data out to the developer community, and within a matter of months, there was the development of smartphone apps which could give you real-time data around transport movements in this city. I can assure you, if we'd done it in-house through the Department of Transport, it would take about 5 years and be millions upon millions of dollars in cost. So this is where I think the challenge lies, particularly for us, coming back to my key point around strategic commissioning into the future. It's an incredibly exciting future that lays ahead for a second-term Baird government. Not only is it about building the infrastructure that can tackle the key economic and social challenges for the state, but we also have an enormous opportunity to improve our customer service to our citizens, and also, of course, ensure that particularly we can minimise the cost to taxpayers when it comes to the provision of government. I would say that, in terms of the poles and wires transaction, it has been front and centre of the government strategy in terms of raising the necessary capital to rebuild this state. We make no apologies for being upfront and honest with the community in terms of the funding of our infrastructure program. Only just before, the Labor Party, who I've been debating on radio this morning, have indicated that they seem very uncertain about the second harbour crossing when it comes to Sydney Rapid Transit. Can I just say to you all, there is no other solution here. Sydney's peak hour train services are at a tipping point. They're at breaking point. By building the extension of the North West Rail Link through to Bankstown with a second harbour crossing, you detangle the city circle, because all lines lead to the city circle, and you can free up peak time capacity by 60% just by, in many ways, untangling the city circle. We must do it. We have no choice. Our population growth is strong. It will continue to grow, particularly as people move away from the mining states to return to New South Wales. But at the same time, we must better integrate what we're doing in terms of our rail network with our road network. And this is obviously the work that has gone on through NSW and the work under the leadership of Gladys Berejiklian and Duncan Gay. It is going to be an incredible journey, I think, in the years ahead. There's a lot of excitement. We don't want to see it put at risk this Saturday because people think that they can send the government a message. This is going to be a lot tighter than people think because it's a seat-by-seat challenge for the government. And the notion and concept of a universal swing, given the enormous volatility that exists in Australian politics today, means that governments can fall by the wayside simply as a result of that volatility. The campaign change that we're seeing courtesy of social media is also something which has been enormously profound throughout the course of this election. And that likewise, particularly, I think, is going to continue to drive the volatility, given that nowadays I can sit here at lunch and send a message to thousands of people around a particular issue that might be running at this point in time. So it's going to be interesting. It'll be an interesting day on Saturday. Greg, thank you for the opportunity to address the Centre for Independent Studies. Can I applaud you for the work that you do? And I'm more than happy to take some questions before I run back to campaign mode.
Okay. Thanks, man.